All right, so on this last page of the 1.3 notes that we started yesterday, we have this decision tree. This is kind of to help you identify what type of sampling method is being used if you're reading a description. So we're also just going to add to this kind of how to take each of those samples, just a brief overview. Again, the whole rest of this packet has the very fine details of how you do all of this, so we're just going to do kind of a summary on this side, so you have most of the information kind of all on one spot. So first, if you're reading a description of an experiment, you have to ask yourself if the individuals have a choice to participate. So like if you send out like an email survey and you're like, hey, it'd be nice if you would respond to this, or do like a radio thing where it's like, call in with your response. People are having a choice to participate. And or if you're being lazy in who you're asking. So like if I'm like, well, we're in 4th hour right now, I'm just going to ask these guys so I don't have to work too hard. Or I'm just going to ask my friends and my family because I know them and they're close to me. So if you're ever being lazy or you're giving people a choice, this is a convenient sample. It's not the best choice. It should be avoided if possible. Because being lazy isn't really going to lead to a good sample that represents your population well. So again, this could be like an email poll, having like a booth that people can choose to come up. I'll just say etc. So again, anything where you're giving people a choice to participate or you're just being lazy. All right, so if we're not being lazy and we're not giving people a choice, then we need to ask ourselves if our population is divided up into groups. So if the answer is yes, if we did divide our population up into groups somehow, then we need to ask ourselves if we take all the individuals from that group. So if when we chose a group, did we take everybody from that group? If the answer is yes, then that is a cluster sample. So to briefly kind of summarize just below it here how to do a cluster sample, you first put your people just into groups randomly. So you create random groups. They don't have to have anything in common. You're just kind of organizing them, grouping them together. Then you number your groups or your clusters. And then you'd use your random integer generator on your calculator to go from 1 to however many groups you have. Okay, so instead of choosing individuals, now you're choosing entire groups of people. And then you just keep choosing groups until you have enough individuals to fill up your sample size. Until you have the lowercase n, which remember that's the symbol we use to represent your sample size. Okay, so that's kind of cluster in a nutshell. Randomly put them in groups, and then you're randomly choosing entire groups of people. You take everybody in the groups that you choose. If we go back up and we're not taking everybody in the groups that we choose, that's when it's a stratified sample. So stratified is where you put individuals in groups based on something they have in common. So like what we did in the activity is you had your royalty, the kings, queens, and jacks, and you had the subjects, which is everybody else. So you create groups by some similar characteristic. Could be like males and females. It could be like grades in school, so freshmen, sophomore, juniors, seniors. Anything where you're grouping people by something that they have in common. And then with stratified, the whole point of putting your groups by some similar characteristic is so that you can get some people from each group. So with stratified, you have to figure out how many people to take from each group. So to figure out how many to choose from each group, you take the number in the group. So like yesterday with the royalty, there was 12 royalties, so that'd be 12 over the number in your population. So in the case of the cards would be 52, because there's 52 cards in a deck. And then you multiply that fraction by n, or by your sample size. And then you round like normal. That tells you how many people you need to choose from each group. And then you just use your random integer generator to choose them. Oops, let's do, so random integer from 1 to the number in your group for each group. And again, the number that you, or how many random numbers you get, will just have been determined by what you did in step number 2 there. So again, this is just a summary. The portion of the stratified sample in the notes will give you more details. Okay, so those are the two that divide them into groups. Cluster, you randomly take entire groups. Stratified, you're taking some people from each group. If we go back up here, so if our population wasn't divided into groups, then we have to ask ourselves if we follow some sort of rule or system, like doing every 4th person starting with the 3rd. If the answer is yes, we are doing something like that, then that is a systematic sample. So we're being systematic about it, every 4th person. To do a systematic sample, we first have to figure out what we're going to count by, so like every 4th or every 5th or what we're going to do. And to do that, we have to find what's called the K value, which is, again, what you go up by, what you count by. And to calculate K, you take your population, which is that capital N, divided by your sample size, which is that lowercase n. So population divided by sample. And then you always round down. You have to round down because if you round up, then it is possible for you to run out of people to choose from before you've reached your sample size. So rounding down just ensures that you don't run out of people before you're done. And then you just have to figure out what person you're going to start with. So you need to find your starting point, or starting person. And we use the lowercase letter p to represent that. And so to find p, you just do a random integer from 1 to k. So again, p tells you what person you're going to start with, and then from that person on, that's when you're going to count using your k. So like for the example that was up in the little box there, if we were doing every 4th person starting with the 3rd, we would go 1, 2, 3, take that 3rd person, and then from there on you would count by 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, take them. 1, 2, 3, 4, take them. And you just keep going down the line, or through the deck in the case of yesterday. Okay, if we didn't put our people into groups and we are not following some sort of system or a rule, then that leaves us with our simple random sample. Which is just where you have your list of your population, you number them in some way, and then you just do your random integer from 1 to n. That's a weird looking n. From 1 to n, where n is your population. And you just keep choosing until you have your sample size. So simple random is the simplest, hence the name. Okay, so this is just a brief overview here, so it's all on the same page, but again, the rest of the earlier parts of the packet have more detail. But do you guys have any glaring questions about any of these methods right now? We're going to have about 15 minutes to continue working on stuff, so.